Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm coming to you with another book review, and this time we are looking at Gilgamesh, a new English edition. So, this is a book that I picked up from a little free library one day while I was waiting on a gig. I was essentially supposed to be meeting up with a buddy of mine downtown to play a little set together, a little impromptu jam night. And I got there early, so I walked around the corner to a little free library, and I found this book and I grabbed it. And I went back and I started reading, and I was like, wow, this is actually really interesting. I knew about the Epic of Gilgamesh because obviously I don't know anyone who doesn't know something about it, but I'd never really read the Epic of Gilgamesh before. And so having this, arguably most complete version was really interesting because despite being a collection of short stories and poems, it really did manage to read like a novel. That said, I do have to say one thing real quick about this book, okay? And that is, do not read it in page order. I know that sounds crazy, but do yourself a favor and do not read this in page order. And the reason why is the author, Stephen Mitchell, decided to put his interpretation of the book right here, okay? At the beginning of the book. So you're getting an individual person's take on the story before you yourself are reading the story. So if you've never experienced the Epic of Gilgamesh before, you're now having the entirety of the story spoiled for you, and your perspective on what certain things might mean artificially colored by another person's point of view, which really robs a big part of that reading experience from you. And I hate to see that. I really hate to see that because the reader should have a fresh experience and be able to form their own opinions. I understand that maybe Stephen Mitchell thought that anyone reading this is already familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh, but I know a lot of folks out there aren't, or not super familiar with it in the way that they would have all the answers, So that actually really irked me. And so I did mark so basically, he finishes his little write-up about what he thinks it all means on page 66. So you're going to skip ahead till you see this page just titled Gilgamesh, and then you're going to read from there. And then from there it's labeled Prologue, Book 1, Book 2, so on and so forth. And that continues all the way. Skip ahead. I should have put 2 bookmarks in here. Until page... I know, real professional stuff here. 199. And then from that point forward you get a few pages of notes where he continues to break things down and offer more individual perspective and thoughts. So yeah, do not read this in page order. If you jump to the point I mentioned and read the book from there, read the Epic of Gilgamesh itself first, allow yourself to form your own interpretations of what these stories mean, what these character relationships were symbolizing, and so on and so forth. Because if you don't do so, you're losing a big part of what makes this story so, interesting. Now, what I will say is that many people who are familiar with the hero's journey are going to be familiar with a version based more on Herculean legend, which came along much after the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is the epic. For those who don't know, the Epic of Gilgamesh is considered the oldest story known to mankind, and it was put together from a lot of, from what I've heard, from what I've gathered, different stone tablets found across ancient Sumeria, and then these were brought together and translated and then connected to form the Epic of Gilgamesh. Arguably not only making it the oldest story known to man, but kind of the first novel, if you think about it like that. So it's a very important piece of literature, especially for fans of fantasy, because it's a fantasy story. It's the first fantasy story that we know about, and it's quite different from the Herculean style of story. I mean, Gilgamesh is not a good person. Not at all. We're talking about someone who was so brutal and terrible to his subjects that they prayed to the gods to send somebody to deal with it. And that is, when they made the wild man in Kidu. And the two of them would, fought, and it's just a whole thing. I don't want to get into it because it may seem crazy that I'm trying so hard not to spoil a thousands-year-old story, But there's a lot of folks out there who haven't read this thousands-year-old story, and it's such a good time that I don't want to do what Stephen Mitchell did when he wrote this book and give you information before you actually read the story that color your perspective. And yeah, that honestly frustrated the hell out of me. As soon as I realized that's what he was doing, I quickly skipped ahead until where it actually started, read that, went back, read the rest, read the notes. That's the way you should do it, in my God-honest opinion, okay? Outside of that, what can I tell you? It's a very quick read. If you don't care about the author's perspective and his notes and his interpretations, you can just read the Epic of Gilgamesh itself, and you can do it well within a day. Even if you're just kind of casually reading a page here and there, it's a very quick read. But it's also a very enjoyable read. It's poetic, it's flowery, that's what you'd expect from a book written, essentially, by an ancient civilization who were really just writing poems for others to read. But it's really, really interesting, and I love seeing that piece of human history preserved in a way. And also, you begin to see where a lot of other popular stories come from when you're reading this. I mean, the ancient Sumerians had their own interpretation of a flood that, enveloped the world, which Judaism and Christianity would later adopt as, the Great Flood, Noah's Ark, and all of that. So it's kind of cool to see the origins of that type of story that existed long before modern religion told that same story. Stuff like that I find really fascinating. Honestly, if you're a fan of literature as a whole, of history, of fantasy, whatever, yeah, this is absolutely worth reading. I'm going to upgrade my copy to a hardcover, because I'm not a huge fan of paperbacks, but I will say, I know a lot of folks who prefer paperbacks, this is a very, very legible paperback. I mean, it stays open, which is nice. The spine doesn't crease even when I press it all the way open on the table like that. Look at that. No spine damage. It's a very nice copy of the book. I'm not really reviewing physical editions when I do book reviews, but I have to mention it because it is. It's a great edition of the book. It reads really well, and I know a lot of folks are going to care about that, so I wanted to briefly mention it. So, yeah, I can't jump too much into the specifics of the story itself because the story is so short that almost anything I say will spoil it. What I will say is if you're expecting to go into this with a modern or even classical fantasy mindset, you're going to have some things happen that are going to shock you a little bit. Not because they're, oh my god, so out there or so dark, but because it's not the way we tell stories these days. And so it's very unique as a reading experience, which is something that I really enjoyed. So yeah, that has been my review of Gilgamesh, a new English edition. It's a 4 out of 5 read. It's a great time. Alright, I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Peace. Take care.